Hi, the SI meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday afternoon, July 2nd. Well, Friday evening we saw an amazing meteorological event, really from the Midwest all the way to the East Coast, known as a derecho. It's a line of violent thunderstorms that lasted for several hours and traveled many, many miles, in this case about 600 miles or so from Indiana, Illinois border region all the way to the East Coast Friday afternoon and evening. Still, thousands of people are without power along the path of this particular line of violent thunderstorms, and over the next few minutes we'll kind of talk about the situation that allowed for this to happen on Friday evening in the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic region. First of all, rule number one is to have a upper level jet streak in the vicinity of for this to occur. And in fact, this is the Friday morning upper level chart way up in the atmosphere, 250 millibars, and we have this jet streak right here cutting across the upper part of the Midwest. And this is always a crucial factor associated with derechos. And in fact, again, this is the upper level pattern come Friday morning, June 29th. Strong, very strong upper level winds in this part of the atmosphere. If you take a look at the different part of the atmosphere, this is the 500 millibar, a little bit lower down than the previous chart. The previous chart showed some very strong upper level winds way up there at 250 millibars. This is about 500 millibars, which is about the midpoint of the atmosphere, about 18,000 feet or so. You can see these lines here cutting across the upper part of the Midwest. And basically what that's showing or indicating is very strong upper level high pressure situated over the southeastern part of the country, but some stronger winds here indicate kind of a boundary zone sets up when you have these kind of a gradient of winds right here, isotachs right here. And in fact, along with that upper level jet streak, you had kind of a boundary zone setting up, especially, let's say, just north of Chicago to just north of D.C. onto the East Coast. So both of those play a role in the development of this derecho on Friday afternoon that lasted right through the evening. The upper level jet streak along with a boundary zone in the general vicinity. Before we get into some of the neat radar images from that particular system, this is a climatology put together by the Storm Prediction Center, the NOAA folks out in Norman, Oklahoma. In fact, Steve Corfidi, a lead forecaster out there, a fellow Penn Stater, great forecaster, has a great website. If you're interested in derechos, just Google Steve Corfidi and derechos, and you ought to be able to find this particular website that they put together, climatology on the occurrence of these kinds of violent lines of thunderstorms only about once every 4 years or so along the Mid-Atlantic coastal region. So perhaps we have had our allotment of these type of situations for another 3 or 4 years or so, but let's hope so. Meanwhile, out in the Midwest, they can occur maybe once every year or so. Out in this part of the country, they're certainly more common than they are here in the Mid-Atlantic region, especially Mid-Atlantic coastal region. Well, this is just a amazing radar imagery composite summary put together again by the Storm Prediction Center folks out of Norman, Oklahoma. And here is the development of the thunderstorms. First started around the Chicago, Illinois region, over across Gary, Indiana, etc. Just kind of a small batch of thunderstorms here, and they just spectacularly grew in intensity as they raced to the south and east. And this particular image, composite of images, shows about a 450-mile track with some of the wind gusts reported here. Right here, 91 miles per hour here in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and all the way to 70 miles plus over the D.C. region just a few hours later. But you can see it started off as a small cluster of thunderstorms, and fueled by that upper level jet streak and some tremendously hot air in place all along this path. In fact, temperatures on Friday reached all-time June highs in places like Washington, D.C.'s Reagan National Airport, where they hit 104 degrees. In fact, just a couple degrees off their all-time high. That fueled the development of this derecho along with the upper level jet streak as it just raced to the south and east about 60 miles per hour on Friday afternoon and evening. Well, here's a slightly farther east look at the radar imagery composite here, again put together by the Storm Prediction folks out at NOAA in Oklahoma. And this just raced all the way south and east, cut right through the Washington, D.C. area on its way to the Atlantic East Coast. Over 800 wind reports of 80 miles per hour or higher were reported all along this path here. Started about 2 o'clock in the afternoon all the way to about midnight, and they're still without power all the way down to the Atlantic East Coast, cutting across Washington, D.C. area. Still thousands of people without power. So again, it averaged, the movement of this particular line was about 60 miles per hour, and the winds were reported as high as 91 miles per hour at Fort Wayne, Indiana, with 70 miles per hour common throughout the particular path from Indiana right to the East Coast. And here's another map put together by the Storm Prediction Center folks for showing the storm reports, including high winds of 65 knots or higher and hail. And it's just kind of interesting how it just spreads out as it cut across, first developed around the Chicago, Illinois area, and then just kind of grew in intensity as it moved south and east towards the Atlantic East Coast, and many reports of 65 knots or higher, including many reports of hail as well. Finally, here's a map that shows kind of a composite of all the precipitation that fell with this particular line of thunderstorms, again showing a spreading out of the precipitation pattern here, similar to the wind damage reports. The rainfall amounts were not that high because the line was moving so quickly, 60 miles per hour or so. Rain was the least of the concerns here. The wind, of course, was the greatest concern here. It knocked down all kinds of trees and power lines from Illinois, Indiana area all the way to the East Coast. So that's just kind of a recap of the amazing meteorological event we had on Friday evening, known as a derecho. Hopefully, we won't see another one for 3 or 4 years. Climatology says only once about 4 years in the Mid-Atlantic coastal region. Well, that's it for now. For the SIweather.com, I'm the SI meteorologist, Paul Dorian.